Hello, I'm Roshni Sengupta, and I'm your guide to this PowerPoint on critical thinking. There's an ongoing debate in educational circles whether or not critical thinking should be taught, or whether this skill is one students will pick up as they journey towards tertiary education. We at Quantum Education think it ought to be taught, especially to help students cope with the demands of the IELTS exam. Critical thinking begins, when we ask the question why, or we question an assumption made by a speaker or a writer. So the dictionary meaning of assumption says it's something taken for granted. It's a supposition that is not supported by evidence. This prompts the listener or reader to ask questions like the following ones on the slide. We learn early on in our earliest memories of critical thinking are linked to childhood and to answering a question like, why are you crying? Children naturally explain the reason, often mixing fact with how they're feeling, especially if they've been influenced by an earlier experience and sometimes even a value system. That is, they remember what someone has told them about what is right or what is wrong. So, although the skills involved in critical thinking build on this natural ability, students benefit greatly from a direct teaching of critical thinking skills. So, we go back to the purpose for this slideshow. The IELTS academic writing task 2 often requires students to argue or justify a point of view or persuade the reader to a point of view. It also asks students to compare and contrast differing modes of technology, medical advancement, and even society's value systems. When students learn the skills of critical thinking, it leads to academic astuteness. So, according to Alec Fisher, to be critical, thinking has to meet certain standards of clarity, relevance, and reasonableness, interpretation, and evaluation. So, students need to state an argument or a point of view clearly. Their choice of evidence or support will show how well they connect the argument. Finally, the conclusion will reflect how well students have been able to examine the facts to enable a logical ending. Well, let's move on to the next slide, which is the critical thinking. There are two sub-skills, analysis and evaluation. Let's look at the skills involved in analysis. So the first one is examining. The next is inferring. Inferring is when something is not stated, but you use your knowledge of the context to assume its presence. The third, questioning, followed by reasoning. And finally, evaluation is at the end of this ladder, but evaluation itself is a sub-skill. So the skills that are connected to evaluating are assessing information, interpreting, defining. An evaluation includes conceptualizing. This is coming up with an idea as a result of assessing the information and looking at all the evidence that has been presented. And finally, synthesis, which allows a combining facts to come to a conclusion. Before the writing, it is always good practice to prepare students using different skills. Listening, reading, and speaking all offer opportunities to practice giving reasons and using evidence or examples to support the reasons. The following activities will help students identify strong from weak arguments and create awareness of the language required. Another good way of getting their interest is to select topics that are current and country specific. This allows students to use their knowledge of context and apply personal experience to the topic. Plus, it gets them to use English in a meaningful way. Practice recognizing arguments. For example, watch a short 10-minute segment of a talk show. You could choose a current affairs show, choose a topic that are current and of interest to students. For example, in India, the question of capital punishment is often a topic on television, current affairs shows, and written about in newspapers. Or another hot topic is the tussle between India's rural population and the diminishing tiger population for land. Should the tiger have priority over village forest and farmlands? While watching, get students to make notes on the points raised by the speakers, assess the information or any given statistics. In groups, they can assess the validity of the points raised by the speaker's reasoning. They can question the speaker's expertise. Do students recognize any bias or prejudice in the speaker? Finally, individually or in pairs, the students can write sentences that express their opinion on the reasons expressed by the speakers. Let's move on to the next slide. Well, another authentic material would be letters to the editor in daily newspapers. Because of their brevity, letters require limited class time and students can read them quickly. Use the same process as you did for the TV show. Instead of notes, students can underline keywords, sentences, and do steps 2 to 4, 5 to 6. Of course, step 4 does not apply, as letters are often written by people who are concerned about a situation instead of by an expert. Another good source is the in-class reading text. A useful activity is for teachers to pick out language from reading texts or get students to highlight language that is used to present a point of view. Some examples. I strongly believe. It cannot be denied that. On the contrary, my contention is. It is clear that, for all these reasons, it is widely assumed that. Debates. In-class debates offer up an opportunity for students to practice using the language of persuasion and argumentation. Now, these debates could be organized by students themselves on topics that interest them. Or you could make up a list of IELTS Task 2 writing, and this could act as a ready resource for class debates. Prepare your students before the start of the debate. Set aside time for teams to gather information and appropriate language. Ensure everyone gets a turn at both proposing a proposition and opposing a proposition. Avoid spending time teaching the formal aspects of a debate. Reflection is also a tool. Now, reflection helps students to understand the process of argumentation as well as their own areas of strengths and weakness. Have time set aside after a debate for students to reflect on the process of the debate itself. Highlight areas of focus. As students get better, ask them to make up an evaluation list. For example, were the arguments valid or not? Strong. What made them strong? Weak. Why did they consider them weak? Or use the list of criteria evaluating arguments in a current affairs. Now we now come to the actual writing. So like all good writing, you need planning. So get students to make a thinking map. An easy way is for students to list questions to clarify ideas and then, of course, answer them. For example, who is the audience? What is the problem? Should I use a quote from an expert in the field to support my reasons? Should I use dictionary meanings? Have I got clear examples? Do I know appropriate and relevant vocabulary to make the essay clear and interesting? Can I list keywords? Another area to highlight is language itself. So create an awareness in students to use this language accurately, as that enables them to clearly present and strengthen a point of view. Some examples. So you have reason indicators, words like because, since, for, follows from the fact that, the reasons are, firstly, secondly, furthermore, that is why. Next, you have words that express conclusions. Therefore, so, hence, consequently, justifies the belief that, from which we can infer, it follows that, demonstrates that, it must be, the evidence is, it implies, experts believe, I infer, I deduce, I conclude that. Conclusion indicators are argument indicators too. Students fall into areas of problem when it comes to the use of language. So they need to avoid the following words when they analyze. Always, never, all, none, nobody, everybody, undoubtedly, obviously, as these weaken the argument. For example, to say all popular teachers are good teachers is not true. So, best to use some instead. Here is another example. The first choice of discriminating travelers is Holiday Inn, a prestige hotel for those who expect the best. The word prestige is questionable and is more of an opinion than a fact. In this case, students need to use an adjective, for example, luxurious, that could support Holiday Inn being a first choice. We move on to the next. We now come to the next problem area for students, hypotheticals. What are hypotheticals? A hypothetical is made up of two sentences. For example, if the tiger's habitat shrinks even further, there will be a significant fall in tiger population in the next 5 years. This might look as if the writer is presenting a reason for a conclusion, but she's not. She's claiming that there is a link between the shrinking habitat and fall in tiger population. It's useful to show how the use of the conditional is to create a hypothesis and a link. Informally, suppose is used instead of if. Grammar practice work with conditionals is a useful preparation for persuasive, argumentative essay writing. Another area of possible error making is the logical errors. These are errors that are made as a result of faulty reasoning and also inappropriate language use. Sometimes it's a result of a bias or a prejudice. Right, let's move on and have a look at some common ones. Let's have a look at some examples of logical errors. The first one is hasty generalization. So here's the sentence. All university courses are boring. Well, the sentence is not probably true because the person has used an absolute like all. So instead, avoid using absolutes. Instead, qualify the statements. The next one is the stereotype. This is a generalization made about people. All Italian men are mama's boys. Again, make the statement specific. Give valid evidence. Oversimplification. This is a severe reduction of choices, sometimes limited to either or dilemma. Either the villagers lose their farmlands or the tiger, India's national animal, becomes extinct. Or here's the second sentence. Traffic is the cause of air pollution in New Delhi. So in this case, students need to identify the causes. So when they add traffic is one of the causes of air pollution in New Delhi, it makes the cause clear and also its effect. We now come to a logical error with a Latin name, post hoc ergo propter hoc. After this, therefore, because of this. So here you have a sentence. James managed to win Miss India's hand because he watched her perform each time from stage left, his lucky side. There has to be reasonableness in the evidence. It's not just time that links cause and effect. Red herring, a very common one. This is a statement that has no relevance to the topic. Crime is on the rise, therefore we had better raise taxes. Here it's important students identify relevant causes for an effect. We come to the last one on the slide, false authority, arguing that if a person is good in one thing, he or she will be good in another. So Shah Rukh Khan is a great actor, therefore he would make a great Prime Minister of India. Well, you can ask students what they think of this one. Logical errors are also made as a result of false use of numbers. So look at this example sentence. The USA is an IT giant as there's 100% computer literacy among Indians settled there. Here, get students to ask specific questions about the reliability of the source. Also to check the reasonableness of the statement. Is it recent, dated? Does it stand up to cross-checking? The next one has a Latin name, ad hominem. It attacks the person instead of the argument. So here's the sentence. You're a big talker with big ideas. What gives you the right to ask villagers to share their land with tigers? It's clear that the person has lost sight of the argument. Finally, the conclusion. Well, learning about critical thinking is a process. Acquiring skills to be adept at critical thinking takes time and plenty of practice. So I like to consider the ITR below as a way of getting students to participate in class. One is interest. So hook students to participate and learn by asking them about topics that interest them. Work with those first. Next, take the lesson off the page. This motivates them as you bring in authentic material for reading and listening. Video clips of shows, films, newspapers, and magazine articles are all in this category. Use those materials also to debate and discuss topics. And finally, there is reflection as a tool. Encourage students to reflect on and articulate their learning, and most important of all, enjoy the lessons.